Marlene Redondo, the Chargée d'Affaires here at the Cuban Embassy in Vienna. Thanks for taking the time to receive us. I want to talk about what's happening in Cuba. You know, there are a lot of questions that people have. What is happening in Cuba? What are these protests that are taking place there? What's the real size of these protests? Could you tell us more about what the situation actually is there?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to your program to do this interview, because I think this is very important, because there has been a very huge disinformation campaign against Cuba, and the projection of the media on the situation in Cuba has been very far from reality, even here in Vienna and in other medias in Europe. And to answer your first question regarding the real size of the protest and what is going on in Cuba right now, I first of all have to talk about what happened previously. The fact is that previous weeks it was developed a manipulation and communication campaign financed by the US with the objective of inciting, encouraging people to go out to the streets with the objective of encouraging instability in the country. And they took the opportunity, the advantage of the real hard situation that Cuba is living right now due to the pandemic, due to the reinforcement of the blockade, with the application of more than 240 measures during the Trump administration. And they took that advantage to do their campaign. And during those weeks, they were inciting to violence. They were calling for vandalism acts. They were calling for assaulting the officials of Cuba. They were calling also for sabotage. And as a result, on July 11, vandals went out to the streets, announcing death for communists, breaking glass, throwing stones, making acts of vandalism. And that's what happened. What really happened in Cuba as a result of this manipulation campaign financed by the US. I don't know if you have read about it, but I was very shocked, because I'm here in Austria, I'm not in Cuba. I cannot be there to see things with my own eyes. But I have read an article in this common and known portal of Cuba, Cuba Debate. That, by the way, I invite everyone who is interested in the situation in Cuba to read articles published in this portal. I read an article of this site that saying that some of these vandals got into a hospital in Matanzas, in the province of Matanzas of Cuba, and stoned a children's room in this hospital. And the children and their moms have to hide inside of the bathrooms or under the bed. This is unacceptable, and this is what really happened. Of course, there is also known that a group of dissatisfied people also joined these disorders. Dissatisfied because they have been experiencing a very hard situation in Cuba in the recent months due to several causes. Due to the electro-energetic situation that was having problems during those days. Unfortunately, that problem is already solved in Cuba. And a group of accumulated problems, especially as a result of the blockade. Yeah. Because we have to have clear that Cuba is a small island that has been affected by the worst group of sanctions apply under any country. And this small island have been facing the same hard situation that have been facing all countries during the pandemic, under a blockade that has been reinforced. Imagine if for a common, normal, developed country here in Europe has been very difficult to face the pandemic. Imagine for Cuba how difficult it should have been under these exceptional conditions. However, I have to also recognize and highlight that my country has done huge efforts in order to fight the pandemic, and we have even developed our vaccine and 4 candidates of vaccine, and we have been vaccinated the population thanks to our efforts, and this has to be recognized and highlighted. And this is what happened. And unfortunately, the media have took advantage of that. And they have put a reality of Cuba that it is not. They have over-dimensioned and intentionally exaggerated the size of the protest. And I want also to clarify that in Cuba there was not a social outbreak, as someone have been saying, including the media. In Cuba was disturbances, was disorder, and caused by the manipulation game and manipulation campaign of the US government.
And when you say this manipulation campaign, could you maybe give us some more details? Because I recall there was a few years ago the US tried to create a Cuban version of Twitter, which was with this exact goal of subverting the Cuban government and causing social unrest. Is that something similar that happened now?
Well, yes, it's the same game. They have always applied the same rules, the same procedure against Cuba and other countries. They want to create a reality to show the world a reality that is not like that, and that's the result. They have, you know better than me, that who have the media have the power. And unfortunately, Cuba is a small island and the US is the most powerful country in the world. And they have all the means to manipulate the media.
So, I mean, these crowds that are coming out there, just in terms of size, is it accurate what they're saying in the media? Are they actually this big, or they're just, because I think you have seen, just as I have seen, they have brushed out pro-government supporters and tried to portray them as anti-government protesters. So the sizes of the crowds, that's also been manipulated in the media?
Yeah, absolutely. The size, also the intention. I think the media have not acted very good, fine. And the media has been acting dirty, in other words.
I mean, do you feel that the media, not just in the United States, but in the Western world in general, so in Europe, even in Austria, do you think that they've been reporting accurately and honestly on what's happening in Cuba?
No, unfortunately not. They have not respected the principle of impartiality that any journalist must have. Because I think they have limited themselves to replicate what other media said about Cuba, without verifying, without contrasting, without even inquiring or I don't know, questioning anything. They have just put the same news that they saw in other media. This is not good. I think, and I don't know if it is a cause of the lack of interest of some media or to the fear of going out the line that have been dictated to them. So, and at the height of the lie, the media have used false images. They have even glorified acts of vandalism with those images and destruction. That's what they have done.
Yeah, because I saw in The Guardian, for example, they had a crowd of people protesting, but they were holding the flag of Castro's July 26 movement, and they say it was anti-government.
It's really funny. It's really funny.
And there's even the United Nations, they use a picture of a woman who's in favor of the government. And
I actually brought some images to show you this.
Yes, so I wanted to ask about these. Like, you know, how far does this go with this image manipulation?
This has been in an imaginal level. Because they have used false images to say certain things, and after a few days that have been discovered that is a lie. They have used an image of a parade for the 1st of May of Cuba. You see like this, okay? Of course, saying that this was happening in Cuba as the protest. And this is an image of a parade of the 1st of May in Cuba that we do annually.
But they say this is the slogan
the protest.
That they have.
Yeah, they said that July 11 people went out to the streets, and this is the protest, and this is the 1st of May parade of Cuba. So yeah. They have also made a collage of pictures. This is of pictures of people wounded, even children, and none of them are of Cuba, none of them are Cubans. This is this picture is cut, but well, you can see here people wounded, bleeding, and this is not Cuba.
Where are these pictures from?
Yeah, they take it from other protests in Colombia, even.
It's not even from the same country at all.
No. They made a collage. And they put this on the social media, and they even put banners with these pictures saying that we in Cuba, the officers, were doing this to the population. And
yeah,
this
I see this typical hashtag, this SOS Cuba, right?
Yeah,
they keep using
SOS Cuba, SOS Cuba Libre, Cuba Free. It's well. And another example you mentioned, the UN. This is yeah, this is unbelievable. The UN took this picture of this person saying that she was protesting, that she was an image of the protest in Cuba. And then they have to eliminate the tweet, because this same woman said, I went out to the street because I want to defend my country. I wanted to defend the revolution. And I cannot understand why my image was taken to say the opposite. This is a fault of misrespect. Yeah. So finally the UN eliminated the tweet. Yeah.
I saw that her account was disabled for a while for some reason, which was bizarre, but I didn't know the UN removed it. It's very worrying, honestly, that they do this. I mean, just what you're seeing happening right now in Cuba with this image manipulation, with the narratives in the media, do you feel that this is something that we've seen maybe before in Venezuela, in Syria, countries that the United States doesn't like, let's put it that way?
Yeah. I think they have applied the same manual for various countries from the Middle East, from Europe, and also from Latin America. Of course, they want to do interventionist campaign in order to achieve what they call regime change. And the pattern of lies, if used to justify a military intervention or for encouraging chaos and disturbances and instability in a country that would lead eventually to a regime change. And that's what they have done in other countries.
And when it comes to what they're saying, pushing for regime change, we hear some of the loudest voices in favor of regime change. They're Cubans or Cuban exiles living in Miami. Miami is a very big hotspot for this, and I mean, these calls for regime change, increasing sanctions, bombing Cuba. Do these opinions represent the majority of Cubans living in Cuba?
No. No. This is not the image of the Cubans abroad, and I thank you very much for this question, because this is very important. I have the opportunity to clarify the people who see this interview. Well, it is true that some radical groups in Miami, especially in Miami, are asking for military interventions and calling for concrete actions against Cuba, and saying messages of hate even towards their own relative in Cuba. But this is not the real image that the majority of the people abroad. I think the majority of the people abroad, the Cuban people abroad, love their homeland, love their country. Because I'm not speaking about the ideology, I'm speaking about love to your land, love to your people. And that's what I feel. And this is very important to clarify, because the media have played a very important role here. The media have tried to highlight the manifestation of hate of the Cuban people. But you can also find on internet images, videos, and messages for the other side, for the vast majority of the Cuban people, saying messages of love, strength, and solidarity. And I want to also recognize, and this is very important, because meanwhile, a part of these radicals were making demonstrations in front of our headquarters, of the Cuban headquarters abroad, diplomatic headquarters, and saying offenses and doing vandalism acts against our embassies.
So in Paris yesterday.
Yeah. A vast majority of the other Cubans were struggling to gather medical supplies to send to Cuba. Yeah, they were doing a lot of efforts trying to send shipments to Cuba with medical supplies, and they achieved that. We have received in Cuba hundreds of shipments of medical supplies thanks to the efforts of these Cubans, of the vast majority of Cubans, with messages of love, strength, solidarity, and unity. And I think that's the image of the Cuban abroad.
It's a shame, because these, as you said, that lots of Cubans actually support their fellow countrymen, their citizens, their country. They love their land, and we don't hear from them at all. We only see one side, so it's the violent, or calls for violence at least.
Yeah, yes, the fault of the media. That's what the media have played an amazing role. But you cannot silence the facts. You can silence the news, but you can silence the facts. And the facts is that Cuba is receiving right now help from the Cubans abroad.
And you know, when you hear not just Cubans, expatriates or exiles, but politicians, Cuban Americans, like we have Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, you know, they're calling for action, whatever that means. And you had the Miami mayor, actually, Suarez, who was saying that airstrikes should be on the table. I mean, what is your reaction when you hear things like that? That someone, another person, never mind someone who is claiming to be Cuban, is calling to bomb Cuba? What is your reaction to that?
Well, that is difficult because I believe that these people you mentioned, this U.S. politician, doesn't feel like Cubans. That's the answer to your question. Because any Cuban who loves its country cannot promote or call for airstrikes against your own land. And those politicians, I believe that they have a very strict line of political interest, economic interest, and also electoral interest. So they call for maintaining the distance between the U.S. and Cuba. They are also against the rebuilding of ties between Cuban people, and also the U.S. people. That this is not a political thing. It's just it's a familiar thing. They are against that, and well. To concretely respond to your answer, I think those people are not Cubans. They don't feel like Cuban.
And what's more interesting, considering these politicians in the United States, you know, some of them call themselves socialists or progressives, and yet, you know, when they talk about Cuba, they as we say, I think it's called both-siding the issue. So they say, on one hand, yes, the embargo should be lifted on Cuba, and then they also say that the government is anti-democratic, it's brutalizing the Cuban people. So they repeat the same kind of rhetoric, the same line as you know, the people we were just talking about now previously. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, these politicians?
Well, I believe that those politicians in the U.S. receive a lot of pressure from others. Any politician who wants to express an opinion different from that is the vision of the government receive critics, and it's not well seen in the U.S. And saying something good about Cuba and in the U.S. it has a very high cost for a U.S. politician. That's why I could somehow understand why those politicians have to, on one hand, to criticize the blockade, and the other hand to criticize Cuba to make a balance. But however, I want to recognize and also express my appreciation to those politicians that, in spite of the differences in ideology, have been brave enough as to reject and criticize the policy of sanction against Cuba. That's not an easy action in the U.S., and they have done that, and we have to recognize it. And this is a proof that our cost against the blockade is so just and so fair that even the U.S. politicians have to support it. So
you think that it's because of pressure from their party or, you know, the government, that they can't actually outright just
Yeah, I believe it could be the reason, because they have to somehow balance their opinions.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, considering the ties between the United States and Cuba, Joe Biden, when he was running for president during his campaign, he said that he would go back to the era of Obama in terms of relations with Cuba. So far, he's failed to do so. Why do you think that is?
Well, Joe Biden have not only maintained the blockade, he has also maintained the reinforcements of the blockade with the 243 measures applied by the Trump administration, and also the 55 measures applied during the time of the pandemic. And he has even applied other sanctions last week against one official of my country and also an entity of my country. And he said that this is just a beginning. So, well, this is speaking about the reason. This is just hypothetical because I have not all the answers. But in my opinion, I believe that this behavior of Biden is a result of the very strong pressures he has been receiving from representatives of these radical groups of anti-Cubans that have been asking for concrete actions against Cuba and military intervention. And also he has maybe this behavior is due to the the electoral ambitions that Joe Biden has towards the Florida state. They move by interest. You know, this is not this is not strange.
And I mean, as you recalled, he said that this is just the beginning, which I mean, it sounds like a threat. It's a veiled threat. I mean, do you think that there's any hope the United States will move towards reestablishing ties with Cuba or improving ties in this term at least?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. We have time. The beginning has not been so good. Actually, has been very bad, even worse than Trump administration, because he maintained the same sanctions that Trump's and even put another one. But we have to give the benefit of the doubt to Biden. Maybe in a few months the policy change. But right now I have not hope. Right now I have no hope because the situation has been very bad.
And you know, speaking of the situation, Cuba is the only country in Central and Latin America who's actually been able to develop its own COVID-19 vaccine. However, as we've seen because of the embargo, you know, there have been ventilator shortages, syringe shortages. There's all kinds of medical equipment that Cuba's unable to access from abroad. I mean, how much has this embargo worsened the situation, even though Cuba has made huge leaps and even sent doctors to other countries to fight this? Yeah,
well, the blockade, I have to start saying that not a single family in Cuba has not been affected by the blockade. Everyone has been affected because the blockade affects every dimension of the Cuban economy and society. And you have mentioned in your question the problems, the difficulties that Cuba has in getting supplies, medical supplies during the pandemic, and this has been as a result of the blockade. And I think that the most painful dimension of the blockade is the impact on the health situation, on the health system in Cuba. And another example of the health system, of the impact of these sanctions, is that we in Cuba are deprived from acquiring some medicines only produced in the US for the treatment of cancer, for example. Yes. And this is very painful for the Cuban people, and this is very alarming also. And on the other hand, Cuba is also deprived from the national industry is deprived from to financing to import inputs for the food production. We have been facing very hard situation in this topic, in the food production during this time of pandemic and also due to the blockade. And even the imports we managed to get from the US, very reduced imports of food, have to be done under a very strict license and under discriminatory conditions. On the other hand, also the persecution due to the rules, the financial persecution due to the rules of the blockade, deprived Cuba from using the US dollar in the international market. I think this is a war with an extraterritorial dimension, because every single action, financial action that Cuba needs to do in the international market, it's a problem, because a lot of banks, I can't say that most of them, deny to have financial relations with Cuba because of the fear of being penalized by the US. And this is a fear, I can say a fair fear, yeah, because the US have done this before. Every year they put sanctions on banks that have financial relation with Cuba, and this is the situation. And even the cargo transport companies, they also deny to have relation with Cuba. I myself have experienced this because here in Vienna there are international organizations, and I work with these organizations. And for example, the International Atomic Energy Agency or the CTBT, and they have tried sometimes to send to Cuba equipment for projects, for technical projects. And they have faced a lot of troubles to find a cargo transport company because most of them denies the work. So this is a very hard situation, and then it's very hard to see in the social media, especially people making efforts to try to justify and seeking arguments to say that the blockade does not affect the Cuban people. Yeah, and they have even said that the blockade only affect the ties between Cuba and the U.S. and that Cuba could make transactions and trade with other countries, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it is ignorance or it is just an intention of saying this kind of
yes,
thing.
I mean, I myself was perplexed seeing this. I was like, do you understand how sanctions work?
Yeah, no, they don't. So this is very hard for me to read those kind of publication, because they have even done reports and documentaries trying to justify that the blockade does not affect the Cuban people. And I wonder, if the blockade does not affect the Cuban people, why do they maintain it? If this policy is not effective, just relieve it. But that's not the case, because they know that does affects a lot. And I say to those people that have tried to, in the middle of the pandemic, to justify the blockade, I reiterate that the blockade does affect the Cuban people, affects a lot. And the fact that it has been reinforced during the pandemic is an act of evil. It's an inhumane act.
And what methods has the Cuban government resorted to? What things is Cuba able to do to circumvent the sanctions, to kind of mitigate the effect of them?
Yeah, this needs a lot of effort on the part of the Cuban government, and also on the Cuban people, who is the one who has to support this situation. Well, we have created our own alternative. For example, in the case of the ventilators that we are deprived to get, we have created our own ventilators in Cuba. In the case of the vaccine, because if we couldn't have our own vaccine, we couldn't get the vaccine of the COVAX mechanism, because this is unacceptable. We cannot finance that, and because of the blockade, we couldn't get. So we have created our own vaccine, and the same happened with other medicines, because I mentioned to you the medicines only produced in the U.S. for the cancer treatment. We have our own medicines that are effective also, and we use those medicines. And the same happened with other dimension of the blockade. We always try to find alternative to the situation, and that's why we have been surviving all these years.
So I mean, if we're clear that the embargo and the various other measures that the United States and its allies have taken against Cuba, they do affect the situation economically, socially. I mean, how do you respond to people who try to frame the entire situation, like all these problems, as just the government's fault? You know, they say, oh, this is socialism and it's the government's fault, and as you mentioned, they say the embargo has nothing to do with this. I mean, what would you respond to these people?
Well, first of all, I have also to recognize that the government of Cuba is not perfect. We have the government has its defects, its deficiencies. Any other government of the world has, and we are trying to resolve those problems. Even the president of the Republic of Cuba have expressed it in several times that we have deficiencies and we have to solve it. And we are in the middle of the process of updating our system, our economic and social system, especially in order to try to solve our problems. But I can assure you that the biggest obstacle that the development of our economy has is the blockade, is the effect of the blockade. And also, if the solution to our problems depending on the internal decision, I believe that long time ago the people of Cuba would be living in much better conditions than they do right now. And unfortunately, the solution does not depend on the willingness of the government of Cuba, but on the willingness of the government of the U.S.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just with the economy and the living, the standards of living that people voice these criticisms. They also talk about human rights. They say that there are human rights abuses. They say that, oh, you know, the government is cracking down on protesters. I mean, what do you make of that when the United States operates a torture camp, Guantanamo Bay, on occupied Cuban territory?
Well, this is hypocrisy, cynism. First of all, the United States government has no right to criticize Cuba because they don't have moral. They better deal with their political human rights situation. They better deal with the systemic racism that they have in their society, with the protest, with the repression to the protest that took place because of this situation of racism, of the murder of Afro-American citizens. They will better deal with the situation of more than 400 journalists that will injure and wounded during this protest. So they have to deal with their own problems. And they also accuse Cuba of torturing the protesters, and which is completely...
Yes, they've been repeating this in the media, that there are people who are missing. I mean, what are these? What's behind these claims?
Yeah, no, this is completely wrong. They have been using the media to say things that completely out of order, completely false. And the case of the torture, they have saying that Cuba tortured the protesters, and I can tell you, it's not Cuba, the country who use these sophisticated means of repression, like toxic bombs, chemical substance, and also mechanical means of repression. It is not Cuba. This has been used here in Europe and also very frequently in the US. And the press, the media, is quiet about it. And this is very cynical. And well, and also to talk about the Guantanamo Bay, the only territory in Cuba where the human rights are constantly violated is in the base illegally occupied by the US government in Cuba, where a torture center operates.
I'm actually wondering, why is it that they're still able to maintain it? I mean, they're illegally occupying this Cuban territory, right?
Yeah, they have illegally, we have tried to get the agreement with them for they to go, but this have not been possible.
We've seen this hashtag, this SOS Cuba, and we see dissidents and opposition saying that, the government is being brutal. I mean, if we compare that to what happened in the United States, you mentioned the George Floyd protests that have been happening in the last year. I mean, do you think that the degree of unrest, violence, whatever it is that's happening in Cuba, is it comparable to what happened in the United States or what happens in the United States?
No, it's not comparable. No, the protest in the United States has a huge dimension. The thing is that I told you, the media, the social media and the press media have played a very fundamental role in this campaign. They have shown the world that in Cuba there is a government who represses its people and a people who is entirely against its government. And this is the press and the social media because of the campaign of the US. But no, it's not comparable. It's not comparable at all.
We see that Cuba sends doctors to a lot of countries. The United States sends soldiers to other countries, as we just talked about. They occupy other countries around the world. Where does this difference in ideology come from? Why is it that Cuba is sending missions of doctors to help other countries, and the United States sends Marines? I mean, where does this come from?
Well, our national hero, Jose Marti, you must have known about it. He used to say a phrase, a very known phrase in Cuba. He said that men, the human, divided into two kinds: those who love and fawn, and those who hate and destroy. And I think that the main difference between U.S. government and Cuba is principles. The Cuban Revolution is based on the principle of solidarity, while the government of the U.S. With neoliberal imperialism moves by interest, economic, political, and geostrategic interest, and it has no limits. It has been proved with the dropping of the nuclear bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also in the multiple wars and conflicts that they have been created and financed, and which they have took benefits from.
I also remember that the United States actually tried to pressure other countries not to accept Cuban doctors. Why is that? I mean, what kind of, what do you make of this kind of action?
Yeah, this is intervention in the affairs, in the internal affairs of the countries. They have no right. I have to say that we send doctors, but because those countries request it. We cannot send doctors for send doctors. Those countries requested help from Cuba, and we have the conditions, we have the solidarity, and we send those doctors during the pandemic. And the US were saying that we use the doctors as trafficking in person, and slavery.
Yes, Trump said that, I remember.
Yeah. And this is also part of the manipulation campaign of the US. That is not right, and what doctors have done during this month of pandemic is helping the Cuba and the people of all the world to get out to fight the pandemic, and it has been recognized by the world.
And when we talk about the United States pressuring other countries, they've done a lot more in Cuba. They've been trying to regime change, to coup the country, to overthrow its government for well over 60 years now. Why do you think they failed? Why has the revolution in Cuba succeeded and continues to succeed despite all these efforts?
Well, I think the response lies in the support of the people. The vast majority of the people of Cuba support the Cuban Revolution. It has been proven in the demonstration of the 17th July, when hundreds of thousands of people took the streets in order to defend the revolution. I think the Cuban Revolution is our project. It is perfectible because every human work is, but it is an authentic process, fruit and result of the blood and the sacrifice of hundreds of Cubans throughout the history, and we have to defend it.
Yes, it's particularly admirable because Cuba is barely 100 miles from the coast of the United States, and right on their doorstep, and has still, despite that, managed to fend off the Americans. How do you do it? The rest of the world, in Syria, Iran, and other countries could I think learn something from Cuba in that regard.
Well, this is the spirit of my country, the spirit of my people, and I know that other countries also have a spirit because. They have fight very hard. And it has to be recognized also.
Last week, it was 2 weeks ago rather, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bruno Rodriguez Paria, he said that he had undeniable proof that the United States has been sowing this dissent and unrest in Cuba and causing it, as you also brought up in the beginning. And I wanted to ask you, could you maybe tell us what these campaigns are? Because has it been just online, or are they using neighboring countries also to kind of sow unrest in Cuba?
Well, they have used mainly the networks, the social network, and the Twitter, Facebook, and the campaign have been mainly in the social media. This is a 4th-generation campaign. And our Minister of Foreign Affairs has denounced this manipulation game, and he even said, make reference specifically to this, the Fox News, because the Fox News editors, they raised the sign on the banner that that some people were carrying. And that this banner said, "Long live the Cuban Revolution," and they used this image during an interview of Ted Cruz to show them as protesters.
Right.
And we denounced this because this is completely wrong, false, and this is obvious. This is not even, they haven't even tried to do it right. They don't matter about this. And this is only another example that joined the hundreds of examples of false images on Fox News that that the media have been trying to show to the world with the objective of showing a reality of Cuba, that as I told you, the people, that there is a country in chaos and there is a country in instability and the government represses the people. That's what they wanted to show.
But I mean, if they have to go and manipulate images, I mean, that must mean they're running out of images, real images of people who are actually opposing the government. I mean, doesn't that indicate that there's no support for this movement or opposition or whatever it is?
No, there's no support. Yes, yes, that's right. If they have to do so many efforts in trying to do this campaign, it shows that no, they have not support, at least not what they expected.
Right. Because in the media, in the English-speaking media, Western media, I mean, they make it seem as though the entire country is behind this movement.
Yeah, no. They have tried to present this reality of Cuba in a country in chaos, and that this is far from reality. Cuba is right now very quiet. We have been celebrating a national holiday in these days, and there is happiness and normality in Cuba right now. Yeah. So they failed. I think they failed. They call us a failed state, but I think what was failed was their campaign against Cuba.
For 60 plus years, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, the Americans, particularly the White House, they were criticizing the internet blackout that took place in Cuba. I mean, how long did this last? It was a few days, right? And just as a follow-up, at the same time, the same day, the White House admitted that it works with Facebook and other social media companies to ban people, to silence them. So on the one hand, they're criticizing the Cuban government for quote-unquote silencing people there, but they are actually doing the same thing in the United States. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a cynical attitude from the United States. And I first of all want to clarify that they are still saying that in Cuba there is no internet. And I'm very happy to announce to everyone who is interested, in Cuba there is internet. I speak to my mom and my dad every single day through WhatsApp. So this is far from reality also. And I think that the US government is acting very cynical, because they have make pressure on Facebook, Twitter, to try to prohibit certain publications, say certain posts, because those posts affect them. And they have only recognized that there are disinformation campaign on Facebook. And I wonder, why do they not pronounce on the publication, on the post of those people in Miami are saying that inciting the violence in Cuba? Why do they don't say anything about it? This is very cynical. And I saw in the media, in the social media the other day on Facebook, a post that said inciting the Cubans to break the security cameras in the country. Yeah. Right. So I wonder, this is cyber terrorism. This is cyber crime. Yeah. I wonder why the U.S. government does not pronounce on this. Why then they don't ask Facebook to eliminate those kind of publications? This is cynical.
So you think the social media companies, they're working with the government, or at least the government is letting them platform or allow speech that calls for violence inside Cuba?
Yeah.
Unfiltered.
Yeah. This is the facts. This is not my opinion. It's only the facts.
What is the worst lie you've seen? And I know this is a big question because there's a lot, but what is the biggest piece of misinformation or mistruth or blatant lie that you've heard about Cuba, whether it's in the media or on social media?
Well, I have seen a lot of lies, even here in Austria and other Western media. But I would like to refer to the two biggest lies I have seen. The first one is of the missed people, the disappears. Yeah. They have even circulated a list of hundreds of disappears in Cuba, and it has been proved by the government that those people are not disappeared. They even included an official, people who work in the cinema production in Cuba, and this person, when he saw his name, he said, "Well, I'm disappeared. This is unbelievable," and this is completely out of order. This is not real. In Cuba there is not a single people missed. And the other thing was they were saying, especially in the social media, that in Cuba the government took imprisoned children. Yeah, and this is completely also false. We have a priority to take care of children. We don't take children in prison and during the protest. This is completely wrong. And yes, there are other lies, but this is the two shocking one.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, do you think they take advantage of the fact that you know, it's this is English-speaking media or perhaps German-speaking media, so it's very easy for them to misinform and you know, trick the population because they don't have access to resources and.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I was thinking that maybe imagine if a common citizen here in Austria wants to know about the situation in Cuba, and he decided to go to the official sites in Cuba or to the newspaper. He cannot do that. Because even the newspaper of Cuba has been receiving cyber attacks. So sometimes it gave you an error, a network error, and sometimes you get you have to take hours or a long time to get into those newspapers. And finally, this person, this common citizen that have not all the time of the world to wait for the news of Cuba, of the newspaper of Cuba to release, he finally goes to the same media that is here in Europe, and then the reality, he believes, is the reality that those media are projecting about Cuba, and this is not fair.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely relate, because just a few weeks ago, the United States removed Press TV's website. They just completely, for the whole world, they took it offline, because, yeah, we don't repeat the same things as mainstream media. So I totally understand. And you know, just as perhaps a closing question, what would you like to tell the viewers? What would you like to tell people about Cuba? Because we rarely get to hear from Cuba directly, from Cuban officials, to get the actual viewpoint from the people there. You know, so what would you like to tell people? What should they know?
Well, I want to talk about three topics. The first one is that when the US government realized that their campaign was a failed campaign, they tried to get support of other countries. They are doing right now a campaign. They want the world to condemn Cuba. And even the last week, they have been pushing so much pressure on some countries, a lot of countries, in order for those countries to support a declaration that they have, the US government has elaborated, condemning Cuba. As a result, they didn't get only the support. They got only the support of a few countries, which is a proof of how isolated the U.S. is right now. In its interventionist campaign against Cuba. That's the first issue. The second point is that, well, I mentioned yesterday it was a very important holiday, very important date in the history of Cuba, 26th of July, and in Cuba everything was calm, everything was good, people were enjoying its holiday, but in the previous days, the same persons that were inciting violence for the July 11 protests, they were expecting that people in Cuba went out to the streets the 26th of July in our historical, because it's the day of rebellion. Yeah. So they were expecting that people went out to the streets to do this protest. And no, that didn't happen. People was in their rooms, were in their house, enjoying holiday. And when they realized that this game was not productive, they start publishing in Facebook and in social media publications saying people in Cuba are in the street, they are fighting the government. And this is another proof of the campaign. And also they wanted, and this is my third point. Also, they wanted that people abroad congregated in front of the diplomatic headquarters of Cuba to say offenses and to make vandalism acts. And as a result, as a result, you saw the news yesterday.
In Paris.
Yeah,
yes,
in Paris, our embassy in Paris was attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was terrorist attacks because they dropped what we call Molotov cocktail.
Yeah, so I believe they refer to them as Molotov cocktails or petrol bombs, yeah? So they threw these at the Cuban embassy in Paris, yeah?
Yeah. This is a terrorist attack, and this is as a result of the campaign, of the incitation campaign financed by the US, and this is not acceptable.
Marlene Redondo, thank you so much for your time, and my congratulations also for your holiday yesterday, so for Cuba's revolution, and I'm very grateful for your time, for receiving us here. Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. It has been a huge pleasure, and thank you so much for trying to get the truth about Cuba. This is not common, and I have to congratulate you.